Some of you may know that the P31RestKit DLL that comes with all of our plugins has a built-in JSON class that serializes and deserializes JSON. Up until now, it's been a little bit tricky to use it to actually serialize and deserialize from actual classes. So the latest update that just went out about an hour ago now has the ability to encode and decode JSON to and from actual classes. That has some limitations, but they're not major. Basically, your classes that you're serializing and deserializing can't be nested. So you can't have a class that has a field or a property that is another class, custom class. It has to be a class that is immediately deserializable from JSON, like ints, floats, strings, things like that. You can't, for instance, you can't have a list of strings as a property of the class. The deserializer doesn't do that just yet. This is the first release, so it'll handle all basic DTO, POCO, POJO, whatever you want to call it, all basic simple data objects. So let's have a look at it. So there's 4 examples in here. The simplest is just encode a class to JSON. And you can see it's just going to spit out the JSON here. And let's have a look at the code for that. So we create an instance of our test object class, and we just use JSON.encode to encode it into JSON. And the test object class is pretty simple. It's just a string field, an int property, and a float field. And this is just to illustrate the fact that the JSON deserializer will work with normal fields and also properties. So it doesn't matter if they're private or public. It uses reflection to grab everything. So public and private fields and properties are all doable. Okay, so next one over here is encode then decode the class. So if we have a look here, we'll see first we encode it to JSON, and then we're actually taking this JSON and creating an instance of a test object from it. And the code for that is for this button right here. So just like before, we first create an instance of the test object, we encode it to JSON, and we just log the JSON just for illustration purposes. And then this is the line of code that's required to take that JSON and decode it into an actual object. So you just pass in the class that you want to decode the JSON to. And this is just calling debug log on it. And the test object class has a toString method that just prints out all the fields. And that's what we saw in the console here. So you can see we got our string back, we got our float field, and we got our int property back. So next one is encode then decode a list of classes. So first thing we have is our JSON, which is a list of objects, and then we get back 3 test objects. So let's have a look at that. So create a list of test objects, and we're just filling in 3 test objects with random strings and random numbers. And we again use JSON.encode to encode the JSON. And in normal circumstances, what you'll want to do is when your app shuts down or gets backgrounded, you can just take this JSON and write it to disk. And then later on, when you get your apps brought back to life again, you just take that JSON, read it in, and then decode it to your actual list of objects. And again, this is all it takes. Just you pass in the object that you want, and this will work with any classes and also lists of classes. And then we just log it. So the last example here is going to be loading tweets into a class. So this is just a quick snippet of JSON from Twitter, standard Twitter home timeline. Unfortunately, they made every one of their APIs private now. You have to actually authenticate, so we can't do a live example. So what this will do is it'll just load that text file into a string, and then it's going to use that to decode into a class. So let's have a look at what we got. Okay, so you can see we're getting a dump here of all the tweets, and the tweet is the class name that we're decoding to. And we just have a few fields here: the ID, Boolean, possibly sensitive, the text, and then source. And having a look at this, so what we're doing is we're reading that JSON in. Normally you would use the www class to fetch your data from a server, and then we're just going to decode to a list of tweets. And the tweet class, just like the other one, it's has two properties and two fields. So that's it. That's all there is to it. One line of code to decode, one line of code to encode. So now it's super easy to take any simple data objects and store them to disk and read them back later.